Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. It's really an honor for me to close such an inspirational day today about pediatrics and rare disease, which is an area very close to my heart, and with a powerhouse panel with very different perspective and experience from the regulatory sides, from industry sides, and also from the healthcare professional sides. But before going into the panel, I really would like to thank the patients, the families who have joined today and shared their experience, because it's really taking a lot of energy to share such experience and try to translate it into something that can benefit others. And we really welcome this feedback. And this is why we are all here today and see how can we connect things. I think it's also important to acknowledge that pediatrics is not a one-time snapshot action that needs to happen, and that treatment and disease progression or impact of treatment can affect children who become then adults and all their life. There is the need to better understand and characterize and generate data to understand and better prevent and treat future generations. So what we've heard today is that from the past 20 years that particularly CPAS has been involved, but also from the efforts that have been made across regions into launching legislative initiative like in Europe and in US with pediatric regulation, really advanced global collaboration under the framework of ICH, ICMRA, which is also the international collaboration for medicine agencies. There are still unique needs in pediatrics and persistent gaps that remain and challenges that need to be addressed. And hopefully, at the end of this panel, we have some ideas and direction on how can we truly advance. And as Julie's mentioned this morning, like stop the intellectual discussions and really look at solution and advance and just do what needs to be done. So it is my pleasure to introduce our panel, and I will start with asking you to please say a few words and present your background and experience, and I will start with Sumati, Lynne, Stefan, and then with Guillaume, who has also experience as a healthcare professional in launching drugs. Thank you, Sumati.
Thanks, Cécile, and thank you very much for this opportunity. By way of background, I'm a pediatric infectious disease physician. I'm a former regulator. I spent 20 years at the FDA, had the pleasure of working with Lynne on many projects. And now I'm in the Child Health and Innovation Leadership Department at Johnson & Johnson, involved in pediatric drug development across our portfolio. So really my thoughts and some suggestions, some for actionable items for as we move forward are really shaped by this experience that I have as a clinician, as a regulator, and now as a drug developer on the pharmaceutical side. I sort of think, I mean, in my mind, there are 2 or 3 buckets where I think public-private partnerships can be helpful in advancing and fostering pediatric drug development. One big area really would be in advancing regulatory science. I have some specific thoughts about it, and I'm sure we can come to it as the panel discussion continues. Certainly, there is room for us to improve the regulatory processes. That's easier said than done, but I think the very, very complex processes that surround pediatric drug development certainly make it extremely onerous, and something I live with every day that I'm at work. And lastly, I think I really would like to also touch upon how we can do better such that the evidence that we generate has global applicability. I know a lot of our discussions often do center around certain parts of the world, but I do sincerely feel like there is the rest of the world and the issues that impact children in other parts of the world as well that need to be addressed. So those are just high-level thoughts I have, and I can certainly dive into the details as the conversation proceeds.
Thank you, Sumati. And Lynne, from your perspective, I think you've seen the evolution of pediatric development and new tools being generated, and we'd love to hear also your perspective on pediatric development and your experience as well in the field. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'm a pediatric nephrologist by training, and I'm at the FDA as the director of the Division of Pediatrics and Maternal Health. I've been there since 2012. So I used to be kind of a new kid on the block, and now I have gray hair, and I'm like one of the oldest ones there. I don't know how that happened, but it has given me some perspective about where we've come in the last 15, 20, 25 years in pediatrics, and the importance of public-private partnerships in that. I mean, if you had said the word public-private partnership when I started in the mid-2000s at FDA, we wouldn't have necessarily even known what you were talking about. We were very clear at that time when I was a medical officer in one of the review divisions. You know, FDA's word was the final word, and we were very clear about it was our way or the highway. And there was very little engagement with well, even with, you know, in public forum, a public forum such as this, less even if you were talking about patient engagement. And of course, you can see now that the landscape is very different. And that's largely because of the activities of public-private partnerships like CPATH. But I will say that easy stuff that was done over the last 20 years is done. So what are the challenges we're facing now, and how can public-private partnerships help children who need treatments? And I so much appreciate the CPATH's emphasis on children to start the meeting. I know we're going to go other directions later on in the meeting, but to focus on children, because I think we have learned a lot about innovative strategies that I think can be applied to programs across therapeutic areas. One example would be, and I know I feel like a broken record, but you know, we're very proud of the accomplishment in pediatric extrapolation. And how can you leverage all the data that you have to support not having to do the exact same thing over again when you have data to support that you don't need to do the exact same thing over again? That is not simply something that we use for children. That is something that can be applied across diseases, across therapeutic areas. The other point I want to make in terms of the utility of public-private partnerships and how we spur that is actually the convening of these kinds of events, these kinds of meetings. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the CGIC, right? The, you know, the global meeting annually. I mean, the work that's being done in the individual working groups to work out what those special issues are, I think, is sort of the magic of CPATH. And I think that's one of the things I see continuing. One last comment, and it has to do with Sumati's point. We're increasingly seeing the importance of doing things globally. And you've heard absolutely, I think, throughout the day that, you know, in rare diseases especially, you can't just focus on one clinical trial center's experience. And if you really want to be successful, you've got to think about, how do I take these trials? How do I take these development programs globally if necessary? And that's for the benefit of all patients who have the condition. It's not necessarily, I guess I should modify that. In the N of one or in the single patient, you provide the single patient that treatment, and that's wonderful. But if you're going any broader than that, I think there's a necessity to think about what's the importance of global development. And that's where that, it's a hard term to say sometimes for regulators, that global alignment, right? But that's where I think that maybe CPATH, other public-private partnerships can play a role in helping us to convene, be a neutral convener where we can come together for the sake of increasing the efficiency, the success of these development programs for rare diseases, for pediatric diseases, and to help gain alignment across regulatory regions across the world.
Thank you, Lynne. And I can only testify that global alignment does not happen out of the blue, and the timing and the early engagement is really key into successful alignment of agencies. And actually, it's rare when there are disagreements between the agencies, and it's really sometimes that discussions are caught up in the procedures, and it's very, once procedures are engaged at the wrong time and the two continents independently, it makes things harder to, you have two big machines, you know, working. And so the global alignment can happen, but it needs to be carefully thought and planned. Therefore, thank you for being here, Stefan, and represent EMA, having crossed the ocean, we.
The outreach. Yeah, thank you. I'm Stefan. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at the European Medicines Agency. Been there for 3 years now, but it's more than 25 years ago that I was sucked into becoming a regulator. I'm originally a clinical pharmacologist and had 10 years of training in internal medicine, adult internal medicine, especially respiratory medicine. And I thought I should become a respiratory physician, but for some reason I started doing part-time review for the national authority, for the Danish authorities, and that dragged me into working for them, became the Danish member of the CHMP, and been involved in the European regulatory system. Then I skipped and jumped the fence and became a consultant for industry for almost 9 years, until I came back now 3 years ago to the European agency. So I've seen it happen on both sides of things, and although I think media and industry sometimes want to play on the differences between FDA and EMA in whatever decisions we make, I think fundamentally we agree, we stick to the same kind of science. We may have different we may not know. We have different regulations. We have different lawmakers. We are not the United States of Europe. We are a political union that gives some navigation issues, and having 27 people in the room that have to agree. But I think we come fundamentally most of the time to the same conclusions. Maybe not at the same point in time, but that's something else. For the pediatric, I think we've seen legislation trying to stimulate development of pediatric medicine. It has been a success, but not a complete success, because I think still we see a lot of, and we heard that today, a lot of children still left behind with no real good therapy, definitely no approved therapy, maybe a therapy that is, for better or worse, extrapolated or maybe not extrapolated from adults, maybe reformulated at hospital pharmacies to meet the special formulation needs of kids. The evidence is so and so in some of the cases. So there is still a big need in pediatrics, and we tried, and we recently finalized a pilot project on repurposing, not necessarily repurposing for pediatrics, but repurposing in general, because that's become a buzzword, and a lot of interest is in there are these generic medicines out there that have no commercial interest any longer. Companies don't have commercial interest, but there may be academic trials, and I'm pretty sure Guillaume can speak to use of these kind of products. But how could we actually elevate the evidence to make these indications on label? And I think that we can discuss that in details, but some of the challenges come down to the kind of evidence that you and I want to see, and the kind of evidence that comes out of academic trials. And secondly, if we can agree on the evidence, there is very rarely anyone who wants to leverage the responsibility of becoming a holder of a marketing authorization. So it comes back to the commercial challenges in bringing these products to the market. So I think we also spoke about in other circumstances, there is a failure in the commercial part of things here. So you and I, we can authorize a lot of medicines, but there are commercial challenges down the road, either because the patient populations are small, or maybe the products are so expensive that the current payment models with you pay per tablet, so to speak, is not feasible. So our payers also need to think about how can they deal with that. So long story short, happy to be here.
No, thank you, Stephen. And I think it's important to emphasize because, of course, pediatrics is not, and that's something that is discussed at global level, like what's the return on investment when you develop a drugs for children, and that's how many decisions are being made. And that's where there is the need to have a common responsibility shared across stakeholders into ensuring the success that new medicines or new approach to medicines, as we discussed this morning in several panels, like gene therapy, gene editing, all this new technology that is coming can be accessible in a timely manner and for old medicines as well, or off-label use to be made right for children. So Guillaume, thank you so much as well for being here today, and we look forward to hear your experience in pediatrics. Thanks.
So thank you very much, Cécile, and I would like to thank you for inviting me, and I'm super happy to be here. I've learned so many things today. Honestly, that was extremely interesting, and I guess that physicians should attend that kind of meeting because we are not aware about all these things that are happening elsewhere outside from the hospital and from the academic level. So to make a long story short also, because I'm also an adult nephrologist, so there are many nephrologists around, and I was trained in Paris, Montpellier, and then I moved to the US, and I was working on a specific pathway, the PI3 kinase pathway, what we call PIK3C alpha. It's a pathway that can be activated in some condition, and I did a lot of research on that during my PhD and my postdoc. And 10 years ago, and why I'm here, I had a patient that came to see me with a kidney disease and a specific disorder. I was not aware about that we call Close syndrome. It's a disease where you have overgrowth malformation, vascular malformation. These are benign tumors due to a specific somatic mutation, meaning that you have mutation somewhere, involving this PIK3C alpha. And in fact, this patient was an adult patient, not a pediatric patient, but then we moved to pediatric. And this adult patient was in a dire situation. He was having like severe congestive heart failure. He was having a lot of pain, et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, we all saw that he was about to die. And at that time, in 2015, so 10 years ago, there was a pharma company, I don't know if I can give the name, yes or no, but it's a sponsor, let's say, that was developing a PI3 kinase alpha inhibitor. And in 2015, this company was most advanced in terms of development of such drug for breast cancer. So it was a specific inhibitor of PIK3C alpha. And this company was running a phase 1 clinical trial, so very early in terms of development. And I asked to this company, because there was plenty of intellectual things to think that would work, that could block this protein that was overactivated in these patients. And after many discussions with this company and then the regulatory agency in France, I could get access to this drug through a specific compassionate use program that we have in France. So I was a bit protected, I would say, legally, and the company also a little bit. And since we had no idea about the potential efficacy of this drug in these patients, because I was thinking that if the drug was working, we would just, block the progression of the disease. It was a rare disease, considered extremely rare disease at that time, but now it has changed. And in fact, we did a lot of CT scan, MRI, took plenty of photography, biological exams. And then we initiated the drug. And what we saw is that the patient responded well to the drug. And we could monitor that with all these imaging and biological things. And then starting with these patients, we created a mouse model, recapitulating the disease, trying to understand how it works, how the drug was working. And then I asked the authorization to the sponsor to treat additional patients because we had additional patients at our hospital, and particularly pediatric patients. We had one young pediatric patient that was 6 years old, having a life-threatening condition, the same condition, and we obtained the authorization to treat this patient. We adapted the dose, as we discussed, based on the body weight ratio and so on. And it worked, at least to improve her condition. And then we treated 17 patients like that, so 19 patients in total. We published that in Nature. And then the company that was not thinking about to develop this drug, for this specific indication, but pushing this drug for breast cancer, told me, it seems to work. We have no more patients that are being treated through compassionate use program elsewhere, and we would like to help these patients. So the company went to see the FDA, and I was invited at the FDA to discuss with the FDA oncology branch how to collect data from this patient, real-world data evidence. And it was during the pandemic, so we went through all these cases that we collected at Necker and then in other places in the world. We collected cases from 57 patients. We had like 10 months to collect everything, to have nice, reliable data. And then this was submitted to an independent CRO that analyzed everything and submitted that to the FDA. And then the FDA invited us also to analyze the results of this clinical trial. And that was positive. And then we had an inspection on site, 2 weeks FDA inspection on site and Necker. I can tell you that was the worst period of my life. But they went through everything, the inspectors, during 2 weeks, 44 patients coming from Necker among the 57. And then the drug was approved in the US. So it's approved since 2022, but not approved in Europe. And that's interesting because there are many discussions around that. So that's why I'm here. And what I've learned from this experience is that no, I'm not anymore a nephrologist. I'm only seeing patients with that kind of rare disease, overgrowth, vascular malformation, somatic mutation. And now we are doing a lot of drug repositioning. We have additional drugs that we are testing now. And it's interesting because when I see patients now, I've totally changed my mind, and I have totally moved from what I've learned before and how I do the medical reports now. I try to assess, the adverse events nicely and how it could be monitored in the future in case, if I have another evaluation or inspection from somewhere. So, and I guess we need to be educated. We don't know that during our medical school.
Yeah. No, thank you, Guillaume. I think it's really a great experience, and that shows how the life cycle of data that is being generated in pediatrics and rare disease not need to be generated in a way that is fit for regulatory purposes, because this data cannot be easily reproduced, trial rerun, and therefore that's really come with a lot of logistics and skills and expertise, also infrastructure that needs to be made available to avoid that everybody repeats from scratch the same experience and learnings, and not everybody have the energy to go through all this entire drug development ecosystem. And therefore, with this in mind, Sumati, I wonder if from your experience you can share with us. I think it is acknowledged that it's not easy to have public-private partnership being established. It's extremely complex operationally, culturally, to have all stakeholders align the language, align the goals, and make it compatible. And I wonder if you have any lessons learned across your experience, even as regulators, that how can we move to the next stage in order to avoid, take all the learnings from the past 20 years and really design something that can help pediatrics across the board, whatever that's repurposed drugs, gene editing. What are the common parameters we can really reinforce and make available to pediatric communities and avoid challenges? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cécile. Well, I'll first talk about my experience, which is outside of involving a PPP. And Lynn, I feel your pain, and Stefan as well, when you talk about regulatory alignment. It used to be regulatory harmonization. We realized that would never happen, so we moved to regulatory alignment. Yeah. And having worked in the infectious disease space when I was at the FDA for a couple of decades, we heard from our stakeholders that they were just not able to develop drugs for common indications because the endpoints did not align between the FDA and the EMA. And that was a real problem. So when we heard that, the way we were able to resolve it is we did not have an intermediary, but we at the FDA and our counterparts at the EMA, we literally just rolled up our sleeves, spent 2 or 3 days together in the EMA building. At the time, they were at Canary Wharf in London. And we went through the indications step by step. Where are we different? The inclusion-exclusion criteria, the endpoints. And then we decided what we could agree on. And then we decided on some points that we would disagree on, right? So we had to agree on something that we just couldn't align. But there are many others that we could align. So we came to that agreement. We went back to our respective shops, worked on our guidances. We did make a public announcement that the 2 agencies have worked together, and to the extent possible, we have aligned, but some differences will remain. And then we found a way for companies to be able to address that through having different statistical analysis plans. So that was not perfect, but at least we had a way forward. But again, we didn't work with an intermediary. Similarly, I've been thinking in the pediatric space, credit, Lynn, to all the work you and your team have done with ICH11A. I think a lot of progress has been made over the years. The infectious disease space, we were spoiled, right? Extrapolation was so obvious. So we didn't, for a long time, I didn't understand why there was such a big deal about extrapolation until I moved to industry. And now looking at pediatric drug development outside of the ID space. So a lot of work has been done, kudos to all of you and the effort that went in. But then borrowing from my experiences in the ID space, I'm still struck that there are some disease conditions and areas where there is a big difference of opinion. There is one regulatory authority is willing to accept extrapolation. So the pediatric program is a PK and safety study. Another health authority says, no, we cannot extrapolate. We need a randomized controlled trial. So it's a big difference. So would there be would it be possible to do maybe a pilot, maybe identify 3 or 4 or to some number of conditions where there is a true unmet need and there's a big difference between regulatory approaches? Maybe a public-private partnership could be the convener of such a discussion. Maybe there are data gaps. Maybe some of them can be resolved. Some of them might require generation of new data to bridge the gap. So I do think that that's one area which is probably actionable and something that we can work on. Another example that I've been thinking, I'm sorry, I draw on my infectious disease background, maybe that's my passion, so it just comes to the fore every time, is, and we had a very good panel earlier on the needs of neonates, and I think there's a lot of discussion around HIE, BPD, et cetera, but there's one thing that we don't talk much about, and that's how do we treat antimicrobial resistant infections in neonates? It is a problem here, but it's certainly a much bigger problem in parts of the world where AMR rates are much higher. It's an important cause of neonatal mortality and morbidity. We just don't do a good job in studying novel antimicrobials in neonates. We have a way to study it, maybe get some data for registrational purposes, get a labeled indication. But we are not doing justice to the neonates in that we don't study exactly how it should be best used. We are not enrolling the smallest of babies. We're not enrolling the preemies. We don't know how to dose them. We have no idea if the drug enters the CSF because we're not able to do those studies. So again, I think there is a role for a public-private partnership to look at the science. Is there more work to be done with animal models? Is there other models that need to be done? How do we bridge the gap such that we get the right dose for our youngest babies? Because it is an important cause of neonatal mortality and morbidity. So I can go on and on, but I'll stop and give the other panelists.
No, I can only agree with what you're saying, and it's what frustrates me personally is that now we have the regulatory framework for innovative tools to be used in the development and generation of evidence in pediatrics. We have AI, we have DHTs, we have a lot of things, but none of this is leveraged to the point that it can truly advance pediatric neonates, rare disease research, because it generates new package of evidence. And how is this being assessed? And I think that in the concept of public-private partnership, we can develop tools in collaboration with regulatory authorities from different continents and design this tool in a way that different regions will review the data in a way that can more easily converge, because they would understand how the tool was designed, what's behind the tool. It's not a black box. The data sources upfront, they can say we need sources and we need data from our respective regions. And I wonder, Lynne, from your perspective, how can a public-private partnership, on what a public-private partnership should look like in order to accelerate the development of tools and regulatory acceptance of innovative methods in a way that also we don't develop one tool per disease or one tool per age groups, and then, we need another 20 years to have another 40 qualifications, so really that there is a real life cycle and approach to tools that can benefit a maximum of patients for the regulatory decision making.
Yeah, I was taking a few notes here. based on what my colleagues on the stage have said. And I think that just like what we're hearing increasingly from the agency, one size just doesn't fit all anymore, right? And I think for a public-private partnership to be successful moving forward, it can't be the one size fits all for any given PPP either, right? So you've got to think about, you know, maybe we're really good at convening meetings, but that's not going to do it. Or maybe we're really good at taking, you know, looking at biomarkers or novel approaches, but that's not necessarily going to do it all. I think a PPP moving forward, if we're really going to tackle the questions that are now, I mean, as broad as how can we model doses in neonates such that we don't need to study 20 neonates to get the right dose, right? Questions as broad as that to as kind of refined as, is it acceptable in any given disease to have a patient-controlled, single patient-controlled study? I mean, you know, so I think that a PPP has to be forward-thinking enough to see, which is what I think Critical Path is trying to do and has been very successful in doing, is moving to the places where the need is identified. And if I just give you 4 areas where I think the needs might be identified, the first one we talked about and Sumati talked about, which is, you know, come on, we can send people all over the galaxy, but we can't model a dose for neonates. Don't we know physiology well enough? Can't we create a model? Do we have animals that we can use to support that? Or forget about animals. Sorry, I didn't mean animals. I mean novel assessment methods that can be used to identify, you know, how to understand how we think these drugs could be metabolized and come up with doses in neonates to solve that problem that we're all facing. To Guillaume's point, that was really important to hear what you said. You know, we here are thinking, you know, movers, shakers, we want to move forward. But the problem is that we're not educating people as we move along. So there are all these people that we're leaving behind as we're moving forward who haven't heard the message and don't know what's going on. So I think part of it has to be that we've got to go out, and maybe there's a piece of CPATH that can go out and educate academicians, patients, advocacy groups, industry, you know, all sorts of areas to explain why this is important. I think that could be a big win. The other piece is that how do we get the right people at the table? And we've heard this before. And one of the things I'm struck by increasingly is we don't have people who have knowledge of, you know, intellectual property or privacy. We heard about that data liberation in the morning talk. We haven't heard from legal minds about what are the roadblocks, because I feel like the science, sometimes we're more aligned than the legal people are, you know, in any given industry, in any given company. So, you know, do they need to be here at the table? And maybe even venture capitalists or investors. You know, we heard yesterday at the INC meeting that, you know, when FDA says no, we always say no, but here's what you might try. Or we'll say, yes, you can do this, and maybe you need to consider this. But what we heard was that investors hear no, not the no, but. And then they stop, then they're done. And so maybe they need to be here at these meetings to hear that we're saying this is important to invest in. So then the last thing I have is children. You know, we talk about children, but we can't talk about children with and forget about the children all over the globe. And increasingly for me, it's been an internal discomfort and sadness that we are leaving out children in low and middle income countries. And I think that whatever we can do as a group to come together and figure out how we deal with that issue together, I think is another big place for a PPP.
Yeah. No, thank you, Lynne.
Okay.
And
Done. Sorry.
No, I think we can agree and relate to the point you mentioned, and I think also to the point of having the right people and the right regions at the table up front help have the right data from the beginning that can support the development of the tool. And I wonder, from your experience, Stefan, sitting on different areas and different stakeholders, how do you think that, because we do a lot of regulatory science, then we publish an opinion, a qualification, how can we work with regulators to embed these tools into drug development in a way that truly it has a measurable impact into facilitating the timing of review, minimize potential objections at the time of review of products, and address some uncertainties that could have been planned by leveraging this type of tools and regulatory science?
Definitely requires more focus that this is happening. Not only educating academic and so forth. I think your points were really well taken, Guillaume, that if you're collecting data now, I'm not answering your question, I know that. That you're collecting data on an academic purpose to write a paper fundamentally, which is most academic wants to do. They don't collect data in the same level of details like Lynn and I would see if we send our inspectors out, and you can read a lot of the nice phase 3 publications in New England Journal of Medicine, a high-ranking journal. The safety part of that result, that is very limited compared to the safety section in a regulatory submission. Coming back to your question, I think it's important that there are a lot of private-public partnerships that are sponsored by governments or governmental-like bodies. You got a lot in US, we got a lot in Europe, but there is not necessarily any connection between what is happening on, whereas you and I can sit here holding hands and agree that we are aligned, if not more than that at least. There is not the same kind of alignment when it comes to where we want to invest, or where our governments want to invest in studying things, and maybe CPATH and others who are not necessarily governmental merit to the same extent could help bring these things together and actually leverage that, because I could fear, and now I'm speculating, I could fear that industry says, but these are biomarkers that has been developed out of an IHI product in Europe, and maybe EMA has been involved, so it's okay for Europe. But what about the FDA? So maybe there would be a need therefore, and that's an invitation to CPATH here to think about whether they could. I know it's not something, it's most likely easier said than done, because now we are talking governmental structures and political decisions where you want to put your money as a government. But I think there would be a need for that, because we need to convey. We can publish on our websites that now we had qualified this and qualified that. I'm not sure. Of course, big pharma will see this, but we should not be blind about that. A lot of the early development happens in academia and in small pharma, and I don't think they come across the qualification page on the EMA website. Mm-hmm. They get lost on the front page, I guess. So we also need a way of having that engagement, and the academic office we have established in Europe is one way of trying to speak to academia and teaching that one thing is research for publication purposes. Another thing is the requirement that regulators would like to see if a product should go from the more academic understanding of things into having a label and approved product.
No, thank you, Stefan. And I think that we also need to change the way we understand what is a qualification, what is a drug development tool, and understand that there is a life cycle behind it. There is the need to work with societies researcher, because once a qualification is being issued by either of the regulation, that sets a regulatory precedent, and then that changes the game for what is the new unmet need in that area if the qualification is successful in addressing existing unmet needs and change the way that the gold standard type of drug development or design of trial should be in a specific area is different. And I wonder from your experience, Guillaume, knowing all what you've learned in the past 10 years, if you had to do it all over again, what would you need to access in order to make this more easy, but also have some other researcher being able to advance the research and translate it into new medicines?
That's a difficult question, and I'm afraid because I'm going to repeat a little bit, but I guess education is the first thing. Education, because in fact, as I told you, like 99% of physicians are not aware how to drive a clinical trial. A randomized control trial is already painful, you know. You have a rigid framework, you need to assess efficacy, safety, all these things, go to GCP. You're afraid about all these acronyms, FDA, EMA, you know, when you're a physician, small physician. And in fact, no, I mean, I've learned a lot again by discussing with sponsors, pharma companies, but also when I went to the FDA, discussing with EMA. In fact, these are not people who like just to push you out. In fact, it was extremely constructive all the time. And, you know, I guess we need as physicians to be more in touch with pharma companies, probably. It's not always corruption, you know, when you have a pharma company around. And also to discuss with agencies, because we don't know what the agencies are doing, except that they are here maybe to inspect and to go into detail. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, probably, it has been discussed already. And I was going to say global harmonization, so global alignment, maybe.
That's the new word, yeah.
Maybe the new word, because, you know, when you start to discuss with one agency, you don't really understand why sometimes it's not aligned on the other part of the team.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's very helpful. And one topic that came a lot also during today's discussion, and that is the starting point for many things, is data collaboration and data sharing. And how, maybe Sumati, how from an industry perspective can we facilitate this data collaboration and give more incentives to have data being shared and many stakeholders, including academic researcher, ask, okay, on top of all my daily job, like it's going to be an extra burden to look at how can we collaborate and share the data. So what's in it for us? And that's what everybody is asking at some point. What's in it for us if we share the data and we do this extra steps? So from an industry perspective, how can we incentivize this data collaboration? Is it an infrastructure issue? Is it more legal, as we mentioned? Or what, from your experience, what are the sticky points that we could facilitate?
Yeah. So I think it's a rather loaded question. It depends on what the purpose of the data is and what types of data we are talking about, right? If it's data for registrational purposes, it's a whole different ballgame, because the types of data you need, you'll have inspectors coming and checking the data. So that I can see why that causes some degree of consternation with investigators. But if it's data looking to establish natural history of the studies, I mean, so I think it really depends on what the goal of the data is, what is the end game, and then you decide whom you're going to partner with. And again, the regional differences become very important, right? We heard the importance of patient voice, and I'm totally on board with that. But the needs of patients are different across the world. So how do we then collect the voice of the patient, the voice of the child in different settings, right? The experiences in a low and middle income country and the expectations might be very different from what it is in more advanced parts of the world. So I think to the extent possible, obviously, you have to first keep in mind what is the question and what is the purpose of the data and what its applicability will be. and then decide how you want to collect it. So I think every piece of information is helpful. Investigator-initiated studies have their place. They are important as well. But if you're talking about registrational trials, then certainly the considerations are very different. And, you know, now with more and more, I think the efforts to do multi-regional clinical trials, I think one of the issues that I've seen recently, we want to work with networks, right? Networks tend to be very regional. And here we want to put in place a global trial for a not so common clinical condition, but we are able to work with this network that's only based in certain parts of the world. Now, how can we then collect data from other parts of the world? Because there either doesn't exist a network, or the two networks don't talk to each other, or the networks have very different requirements. So there are a lot of practical difficulties in how we try to generate the data, and then the data have to be good enough for Lynne to say it's okay. So I think I think it's pretty challenging, but working in the pediatric space, working with small populations, I think it's even more critical that every bit of data matters and plays an important role in our decision making.
Yes. No, thank you for sharing. I wonder if there are any questions from the audience, although I appreciate it's the end of the day, and but I think it's a good time to, yes, thank you, Derek.
I think, Lynne, you made a really good point about maybe missing perspectives here, such as investors and maybe legal. And I just felt that really resonated, and that a lot of behavior by pharma companies is influenced by those two, well, whether biotech, obviously by VCs, but legal, everybody. And I just, have you thought about the right forum to make that work? Because it's, you know, it's quite a different world in some ways. Are there models that CPATH could build on?
Yes. I hope. So, you know, these are, again, I didn't speak these words because we have been successful or even FDA has been successful. I just feel like in terms of what would make a PPP successful in the future is to address these kinds of issues. So my hope is that there is a way for a PPP like CPATH to pull in maybe some more stakeholders in the appropriate, you know, space. I don't know if this is the appropriate space, but in whatever space is appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it's very, there are some challenge into understanding how can you reconcile the VC world and the voice of the patients, which should be at the center. And I think if we work together at CPATH with the regulators, the researchers, the patients to really develop and identify what matters to the patients and their families, the burden, and how can we generate the right level of evidence for the regulators. If you then engage with VCs or others, like maybe it can be perceived as a de-risk area and incentivize to have more drugs or new areas being explored. And I think it's really important to, again, have the right people at the right time at the table, not to have too many conflicting agendas or different world or models that are not incompatible, but it takes time to be reconciled, and yeah, it needs to be carefully navigated, let's say. Any other questions? Yeah, please, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, Leslie Maloney, Genentech Roche. I wanted to hit on another point, Lynne, that you made, which was more fit for purpose PPPs, because the idea that I could even look at the IHA model, that it's going to be 5 years and this tied to this amount of money that you're going to be expected, and you can't really pull out if you as a company change directions of your development pipeline, like, well, we're no longer investing in that space, but we're committed, or that it's going to be these very long terms. What are ways that we can engage with regulators to escalate? You know, if we want to talk on pediatric extrapolation, differences between FDA and EMA, differences between FDA and divisions across FDA, and ways, and again, a safe space to have the necessary discussions and escalations, if you will, for these that can be more rapidly taken on rather than 4 or 5-year projects, pilots, demonstrations. Let's just have a space to engage and pull in those right people. But it can be a one-time conversation. It can be, you know, multiple times, but more fit for purpose. I love that idea, Lynn.
Thank you.
Can I say
Yes,
something?
please, yes.
So the other thing I've been taking notes with interest today, and even starting out with the first session, we heard this sort of tension between ideas, tension between sort of two competing priorities, right? So I started writing down these things like we all, I think, in the drug development world understand risk-benefit, right? That's clearly kind of two opposing forces, and you got to kind of get it right, because the risk-benefit determination is not going to be the same for every disease, for every therapeutic product. And then I started to think, well, what's collaboration? What's the tension there? It's competition. So there's this tension between collaboration and competition. And then I started to think, well, then there's tension between innovation and conservation, like being conservative versus being innovative. And then I thought, well, then there's a difference between, you know, what's proprietary and what can be shared. So, you know, what I was thinking about during the day is that there are all of these different areas where we know that there's sort of this natural tension. And I think that for any given product development program, for any specific problem that we're facing, that, you know, just like we were learning on the extrapolation framework, that it's not yes or no. It's not either you compete or you collaborate. It's not that either there's all risk or there's all benefit. It's there's some sort of continuum on which all of these sort of ideas fit. And I do wonder if there's a way to create, you know, a paradigm in which we consider these competing priorities or competing issues on a continuum rather than it's either yes or it's no. Yeah. And I think that's a place where, again, the public-private partnership, oh, there it is, public versus private, right? I mean, you know, I think that's a place where it could a natural place where those ideas could be thought out and put into a framework that could help developers.
Yeah, I like framework, as you know.
Yeah, exactly. You're the queen of the framework.
Yes, no, thank you, Peter, please.
All of these issues that were just posed are the issues that regulatory lawyers, intellectual property lawyers, and I could go on with a list and a list, consider every day in the context of development of drugs. There is there's probably more than one organization, but certainly the Food and Drug Law Institute puts on annual meetings which mirror what we have discussed. Take privacy, for example. That is deeply embedded in the issue of informed consent, which is a very legalistic document. This is the kind of collaboration among disciplines that could easily occur.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. And listening to the patient's experience and the burden of going through clinical trial, I felt, and they say, we want to be heard. And I felt like there should be some ethical requirements to have when a trial is to be approved, how the patient have been involved, is it validated by the patient? I think it needs to be really enforced, as you say, that this is not something that is nice to have, or there are many different ways to do it. I think it's becoming increasingly evident and important that we need to minimize the burden on patients on top of clinical trial, on top of everything that is going. So I think that's some fruit for thoughts to be addressed. Maybe in the last few minutes, I would like to ask you, after today, after our session and your experience, like where would you like to see pediatric development in 5 years? It's because I'm young in my career still, mid-career, let's say. I'm not so young anymore, but I'd like to know that when I'll retire, things will change. Things have changed, and we as a community, I think some of us have worked together for a long time, for decades. Same with the INC and the neonates community. Yesterday, it was obvious that the communities are closely collaborating. There is global collaboration in the field of pediatrics. And where would you like to see things going? Like in order to have something that allows to integrate technology, not 10 years after for children or new medicines, with still the 9 years gap between adult licensing and pediatric licensing. And I appreciate the challenging question at the end of the day, but so maybe Guillaume, if you want to
volunteer.
Thank you. Just before addressing that, I wanted to just maybe raise one point, because there is something that maybe CPAS can try to address with a regulatory agency, is a risk for pharma companies, when they are doing some drug repositioning. That's something that I often hear from pharma companies. We have these wonderful compassionate use programs that we can use more or less everywhere. So you can obtain the authorization to use a drug in another purpose. But then when you go and you start to discuss with pharma companies, they tell you, no, I don't want, because if I have any adverse event in this specific population, it's going to block the development in the other indication. So I don't know if maybe in the future CPAS can try to see how to de-risk that. I mean, I don't know if it is feasible or not to address this specific question independently, but I understand, of course, that if you have a specific adverse event somewhere, you would like to see in another indication. But that's all something that I very often hear from pharma companies, and then they don't want to move forward and to provide access to drugs. But then for your second question, it's difficult. I guess that certainly it would be nice to have co-development for adult and pediatrics, of course, to have new way to do some clinical trials. And we have more and more ways now with AI to progress, to understand more and more some natural history of some rare disease, so we can design new clinical trial. And maybe I totally agree with Lynne and what I heard before. We can do whatever we want. So why are we not able to address, some PK in this specific population? That's something that is totally crazy.
I can only agree. Yes, thank you, Guillaume, for taking the challenge first. Sumati, would you like to go next?
I think we have to build on the successes we've had. I think we've certainly made good progress, but there's still work to be done. And to the extent possible, if we move now towards more tailored approaches to pediatric drug development, rather than what we've been working on, more of a one-size-fits-all approach, I think will help us shorten the lag, which really has persisted despite all the advances. And hopefully, the impact that we make is available to children across the globe. And I think that's doable. We just have to probably change the way we do a few things. But certainly we have to build on all the successes we've had so far.
Yes, it's important to highlight that there are successes and that we can only learn from it. Stefan, would you like to go next?
Yes, do I have a choice? Not really, huh? No. So I agree with all what's been said before. We haven't talked so much about rare diseases, but there's an overlap, of course, pediatrics and rare diseases. On top of what's been said, I think there is an opportunity for CPAS, a challenge for you and I and other regulators hand in hand in alliance or collaboration or whatever new word we're going to come up with here. Also to come up with what we was discussing this morning around personalized medicines, moving away or not even moving away, because solving the problem that randomized controlled trials is not possible. not just unfeasible, but not possible, because we are talking about highly individualized therapies. We are talking about a very small number of patients. Some of it may be able to be solved via some form of platform technology, but we need to agree on what are the evidential requirements from a regulatory point of view to solve that evidence generation conundrum we have there. And we're going to solve it.
For sure. We did solve a lot already. So, and Lynn, would you like to go next?
So I'm probably going to make some people mad. I don't think anybody on the stage, but so let me just say that I am a huge, lifelong Washington Commanders fan. And there I've said it. Sorry, all of you Cowboys fans out there, Eagles fans. But in all seriousness, I heard something during the broadcast of the game on Sunday that really hit home, and I think it applies here. And that is that the team this year is different from the team last year. And they said the team at the beginning of last year, and they said the team this year or last year seemed to like, well, if you won by a couple of points, there was hope there. Maybe they'll win another game at some point during the season. And what's changed over the course of the season is that now there's this belief that they're going to win. And so I think what I would love to see in the next 5 years for this organization and for pediatric therapeutics development overall is not a hope that we're going to figure things out someday, but a belief that we can do it, whatever situation confronts us. And I think with the group that I've heard here today and yesterday, that I do think that we're moving into this area of belief that we can do these things as opposed to hope that someday somebody's going to figure it out.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Lynn. And I think we needed some hope at the end of the day. And no, but I agree. I think there is too much happening. So we can't see things in one snapshot vision. And I think we need to look at life cycle of things, how to de-risk, how to develop a risk-based framework approach to developing and integrating innovation in drug development in a way that all stakeholders, have an understanding of what do they need to do and where are the red flags so they can approach the right experts and communities in order to anticipate. And we have learned also that we need to plan that the impact of disease and drug development is also, particularly in pediatrics, neonates, rare disease, for life. And we need to anticipate the long-term follow-up and manage all evidence generation at different steps, matching the requirement of regulators so everybody can benefit from it in a timely manner. So thank you very much, everyone. And I will give the floor to Klaus to close the day. But thank you to our panelists. And,
Hey, I don't know about what is it? Washington Commandos or something? Fight me all you want. I'm agnostic to that because I don't understand sports. So, but something that Lynn said is key. We've been at this 20 years and we've had some major successes. But the reality of today, especially this year, has provided us with an inflection point that gives us an opportunity that we can either seize it or miss it. I love your comment about fit for purpose collaborations. That's exactly what we need to be thinking about. We talked about this morning about how to adapt to the collaborations we have and set up the new collaborations for success. That needs to be a key component of that. Linking the timeframe of our collaborations to drug development timeframes. We have enough experience, enough track record, enough converted individuals in academia, in industry, in the patient communities to now move at an even faster pace to then enact what Lynn just said. Not just hope that someday we'll figure this out, but know that we can figure this out a lot quicker and not be married to any particular type of regulatory pathway or not be married to any particular type of old school evidence generation paradigm. This is what we can do and this is what we will do. This is a perfect setup to end the day and put in a plug for the panel tomorrow because we're going to open the day with a conversation about how to modernize the entire evidence generation enterprise. So thanks, everybody. We look forward to another great day tomorrow. And yeah, the next 20 years is going to be another interesting journey. Thanks so much.